So the idea also is, and this is partially answering your question there, when we're talking about the joint, we can also talk about representations of the joint, which we might have seen in a film, like we did last week with Gavin's presentation. And so that the image of the joint is the signifier, okay? And the word or how it's used, sorry, is the signifier, and the word or how it's used is the signifier. So language, which is what semiotics perhaps originally started with, has gone beyond, semiotics has gone beyond just engaging with the meanings of language and words to engage with the meanings of images. As we discussed last week, what you're looking at here is not just, in a sense it's about beer, okay, and that is the signified, the beer is the signified, but the language, the visual language here is also about success, masculinity, control, and so on. So there are a whole range of meanings that are associated with this particular image, even though it's actually about beer.
So advertisers would have this down pat.
Oh, absolutely. There's nothing in this ad that isn't here for a very specific reason. Signifying being the bottle. Okay, the signified is the wines, the alcoholic beverage. However, if you take a bourgeoisie take on this, then you can transform the sign. Okay, so they put their own emphasis on it. So the new signifier becomes wine, which was originally up here, and the new signified is the idea of a healthy, robust, relaxing wine. However, if we consider that there might be a dominant or hegemonic view that takes over this image, that takes over the sign, and applies its own emphasis, okay? So the new signifier becomes intoxication. This, I hope, Rodney, comes back to your point, which is a good point. And the new signified is the idea of intoxication as a pathology, okay? So it's unhealthy, dangerous, antisocial, and deviant. And this is my argument, that when we look at, and we saw this in the movie, and it's the point that Gavin makes in the images that Gavin shows, this reconfigured sign engages with drug use and representations of drug use in the media from a particular perspective. And so that's the point. It's not so much that, yeah, sure there are hidden messages and ads, we know that, but there are also dominant ideologies in representations of any given phenomenon, any social phenomenon that is occurring, particularly if it's something that's polarizing or something that that people have a powerful response to. Okay? And so the idea here is that there is a certain type or a certain way of thinking about drug use, which is this, if we look at it, if we consider the historic process that we've gone through to get to this point in the talk so far, we think about the representations that we saw prehistorically, and then we look at the changes that occurred with legislation, okay, and the various professional developments around the control of drugs in America, for example, turning into global legislation and so on. What we see is that there was a change in the message that people were receiving about the use of drugs. Okay? So this is the point. The interpretations of the particular message, there may be a variety of messages. And there are a variety of messages, and one only has to go on the internet if one wants to see a whole range of opinions about drug use. However, the argument that Gavin makes in his 2003 paper, and that I'm making through this part of the course, is that there is a particular representation that dominates. As we're going to come to see in the rest of this talk and much more next week, there's a range of responses to cannabis use, and people have a range of explanations as to why they use cannabis that goes far beyond this classic image of the stoner dude, you know, or the crazy laughing person. And so in that sense, I guess I would actually disagree. I hear what you're saying, it's a good point. Superficially, that is how it looks. When we look at it, you think, oh, well, it's just a joke. It's not, people don't feel threatened by this, so it's okay. But of course, if you're a person who has made the choice to use cannabis, then, and you may have a number of reasons why you do that. There are, for example, we've got a good selection of people here in this group. We've got someone who's used cannabis medicinally, and we're going to hear from him next week. And we've had Abe's conversation a couple of weeks ago, where the consequences of cannabis use in terms of the law are actually quite significant. And actually Abe's sort of battling that at this very moment, aren't you? I understand that process is still going on. So on the one hand, yeah, it looks kind of harmless, and yet there are people, there was 2 reports that my attention was drawn to today, which are looking at the numbers of people who were arrested and then prosecuted for cannabis offences over the last 20 years, and a range of figures I'll probably incorporate into next week's talk. But the fact remains is that about 10,000 people a year in New Zealand are prosecuted for cannabis, and about 10% of those people don't have any other conviction. And so there are implications that perhaps aren't drawn out. So what I want to do now is go on to this idea of estimating drug harms. And this, in a sense, leads on from this notion of exploring the different perspectives that we can have about drug use. And where do these perspectives come from? Are they rational perspectives? Do they give us an accurate depiction of this phenomenon? You might, like Gavin would have argued, for example, that it's can be difficult to get education about drug use. Where do we find out about it? It's an illegal and illicit activity. Where do we get our information from about that? We get it from movies, we get it from media reports, and so on. The next few slides relate to the work by a guy by the name of David Nutt, which admittedly is a rather unfortunate name in the context of this particular conversation. However, he's a professor of psychiatry in the United Kingdom. He is the chair of the Advisory Committee on Misuse of Drugs, the ACMD, which is the closest equivalent for New Zealand would be the EACD, or the Expert Advisory Committee on Drugs, which is a government set up committee that actually takes in experts from a range of fields to look at the harmfulness of drugs. And he's a highly respected researcher. He's a clinician. He's not just an academic, you know, warming his seat in office somewhere. And he recently gave a speech at this last one here. That was reported in this briefing paper. Thanks, Tony, by the way, for sending that on to me. Oh, you've got it here. Good on you. That's